Hey, Mac Harris here. Thanks for watching. Today we're going to do a short video on DSLR cameras. A lot of people are choosing these cameras in preference to point and shoot cameras or even just their mobile phones. I'll explain the reasons why people prefer a DSLR camera, and having a look at everything, maybe you'll decide it might be the one for you. So let's get stuck into this. Now, you may feel that the best camera to have is the one on you right there and then, and that's why smartphones seem to be a smart choice. But with their readiness and availability, and everyone being so snap happy and using mediums like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, does this mean the death of the smartphone itself? Well, hardly. Because despite the convenience and ease of use of these touchscreen wonders, unfortunately most of the time your pictures end up looking like this kind of blurry, noisy mess when you try and capture the moment. I am exaggerating, of course, but particularly in low light conditions, here for example, or in a pub, or in anywhere that's moving, you kind of get the sentiment of what's going on, but you get a lot of noise. And the reason for this is because of your lens. The light has to enter a tiny lens and then focus on the sensor. Here's an example of the small hole that is the lens on most modern day smart cameras. In our marvel of miniaturization, everything has become small and miniature. Let's break apart a smartphone lens, and as you can see, the light collecting part is the sensor, and the sensors on these smartphones are unfortunately extremely small and don't get to connect enough light. Here, for example, is the iPhone 4S, a small sensor in comparison to the other sensors. Even when you take in the Nokia PureView, it's still an incredibly small sensor compared to the ones you'd get on a DSLR. Now this is the main point. And sure, you can go ahead and get yourself a bigger lens and put on different types of lenses. Yes, you might be increasing the optical quality of the light that's going into your camera, but at the end of the day, the sensor size is what really matters as well. And you won't have the control to do shots like these. These shots require control of either a fast or slow shutter speeds, and this is something that you won't be able to get with your camera for now on the smartphone. These settings and fine adjustments can be made on DSLRs, allowing you to have creativity and exploring many options depending on the situation and the light presented. As you can see from this picture here, this bike is shown in perfect clarity, and the details on the metal chassis really do shine even in low light conditions. There's also creative use here by using a slower shutter speed to capture the movement of the car's headlights. Now what's making all of this possible is the huge sensor inside these DSLRs. Let's look more closely inside and see what's happening here. As we go inside the DSLR sensor, we see that it looks almost multicolored, but actually in fact it is just capturing 3 colors. The sensor is made up of rows. For example, mine has 6,000 rows going across and 4,000 down. When you multiply that, that gives you 24 million pixels. But it's actually the size of the pixels inside the sensor that matters. Back to the example of the iPhone, even if that had, say, a 33 million pixel or a 50 million pixel sensor inside, the sensor is so small that it wouldn't really make a difference. Yes, you may get a higher number of pixels, but with the sensors being so small and all of those pixels being so tiny, because the pixel size depends on the sensor size, you're not going to get very clear pictures indeed. And that's why for manufacturers the megapixel race has kind of died down, because it's a combination of lens and sensor size that gives you the best quality. Now, if you're still struggling with this analogy of sensors and sensor size, think of it this way. If I have a 3 by 3 square, and that represents 9 pixels, and I'm able to put that square, because it's the size of, say, my dinner table, and I can lay it down, and its job is to capture light. And then I have a square which is also 3 by 3, but it's the size of, say, my house. The squares on the size of my house are going to be a lot bigger. So even though both are 9, let's say they're pixels in size, the one on my house is going to be bigger. So it has the ability to capture more light. So here we can see in this diagram that a small pixel will only capture a small amount of light. And the bigger the pixel size in the sensor, because the sensor is bigger, the pixels are going to be bigger, the more opportunity you have to capture light. Now obviously if you capture too much light, your image is overexposed, but most of the time sensors are small, so the problem most people have is that their image is going to be underexposed. Now the way a sensor does this is pretty straightforward. It captures red, green and blue values and combines them to make all the colors. And sensors have different ways of doing this, but that's not important to us. Let's go back now that we understand that. Now, there it is in green, the iPhone 4S, okay, which is a small sensor. And here it is again, the smallest level. Now, as we go higher and higher, something very interesting happens, okay? So, as you go and see the familiar world-class brands you associate with DSLRs, you can see that it's their sensor size that matters. Look, for example, at the Nikon sensor size and the Canon sensor size. They're huge. But these are called APS-C. Well, what does that mean? The APS-C stands for cropped. This is a cropped sensor. So if it's cropped, what's bigger than it? Well, it's called the full frame sensor, or the 35mm. And for many photographers, this represents the gold standard of film. 5mm film has the dimensions of 35mm across and 24mm down. For the professional photographer, this was the go-to sensor, the minimum requirement needed to gain excellent low-light sensitive photos that you could use in most scenarios. That's why the 35mm standard became so popular. We can see how much of a difference sensor size therefore makes to the image quality. And if we go back and have a look again at those different types of sensor sizes, we can see that even at the full frame level, there is still a room for sensors to be larger than this. Now this is an example of one here, the Kodak 39000. So again, that's giving you much bigger sensors, much bigger pixels, much more light. Now these are the sort of people who get their photographs taken by this sort of sensor. And these pictures are massive in size. They may be 80 megapixels. This is probably shot by a Phase 1 camera. These sensors are very popular for landscape photographers too. But let's recap on what we've learned so far. Smartphones are popular, but they'll never be a replacement for a solid DSLR. Despite the fact that you can put on a great lens, that's not the main issue. The main issue is the sensor size, which is too small to collect a decent amount of light. Contrast this to a DSLR, which has a huge sensor size, which means that each sensor pixel can collect a larger amount of light. This ability to capture such a great amount of light separates the DSLR from the point-and-shoot and the smartphone, and also its many additional features that allow more creative control. Cropped sensors and full-frame sensors are the main way to go, but they have their differences. Cropped sensors are smaller. In this example, the cropped sensor picture of the moon looks less bright and has less detail than the bigger sensor. It's important not to get too bogged down in this cropped sensor versus full frame debate. Any DSLR will be an improvement over a full frame sensor. Here are some prices of full frame sensors, which can be very expensive and go into their thousands. That concludes this talk. Thanks for watching my video. I hope that helps clear up a few things. I'll be putting up parts 2 and 3 later on. Take care. Bye.